have some things to say about how the council decides what we're going to work on. Because I think that when a pastor comes back from sabbatical, it's an interesting time in the life of a church. Yes? There's a lot of unsettledness, and I think there's this question of vision of like, where are we going to go together from here? And I think a lot of churches are asking these questions these days of how do we decide what to do now, given all the things that are going on, and especially churches changing, and the church that we have been may not be the church we need to be. And there are just lots of gigantic question marks in the air over people's heads, right? Like I go visit churches and I just see the great big question marks. So I'm hoping that by sharing with you a little bit of how the council understands the world we're facing and how we shifted our approach to ministry and what we think an approach to this for local churches might be, maybe it'll spur some holy imagination for you. There should be plenty of time for questions. I've got handouts and stickers on the table over there. I'm sorry, I'm not literally pointing at you. And if you have questions as we go along, I am super not formal, so please. There we go. So this is a picture of what ecumenical ministry used to look like. There was once upon a time a radio show. WKOW. Yes. Sponsored by Madison Mutual. And this is more recently what ecumenical ministry looks like. You've got COVID vaccination clinics led by our community health team. You have an outdoor meeting about ecumenical kinship and community being built in Dane County. Because, hey, early COVID, when it started being safer to gather, but still not great for indoors things, you could meet outside and it was a little bit safer. We have meetings about press conferences about public policy issues, and we have conversation circles about restorative actions are just some examples of what ecumenical ministry looks like now.
How long ago was that?
I believe that was the late 40s. So, and how we got from A to B, and actually the interim step of probably where we were in the year 2000 to where we are now. We asked questions about where we have been, where we want to be, and what is needed. We arrived at these values now, our core values of courage, justice, and holy imagination. We established a 10,000-foot view of what's going on and created what's called a theory of change of how we want to impact what's going on. And then we focus on our everyday decisions, making sure they model the world we long for, right? We're about this world of opening doors. How are the everyday decisions we make, everything from personnel policy to talking to folks on the ground, doing that? So people ask me all the time, what does the council work on now? We work on the big ball of yuck. Because that's really the best thing to call it. And I think you know what I mean, right? There's so much stuff going on and it's all tangled up together. The reality is we work on the big ball of yuck. And whenever you pull out one piece of the big ball of yuck, you find out it's attached to 3 other pieces of the big ball of yuck. So, okay, we are working on COVID. Well, guess what? It's actually related to racism and the affordability of healthcare and misinformation and. So what are we really working on? The big ball of yuck. Which relates to the question that most churches face. Pastor, how do we decide what to take on? There's so much. We can't do every single ministry. Well, no, you can't. But you can realize that the ministries you do take on have multiple elements, right? So you've got a green team, right? You've got that amazing kiosk over there, which, by the way, I took pictures of the recycling kiosk and I put them on the Wisconsin Council of Churches Facebook page because it's so cool. So I'm sorry if there's anybody in the room who doesn't like the kiosk. I think it's amazing. But, okay, climate justice, environmental justice, right? Recycling. You are taking care of the world and the planet. This relates to other meetings that I'm about to have this week that relate to our Indigenous neighbors and our Black neighbors and what it means to have housing in places that's safer and what our groundwater is like. And. So by working on a green team, you're working on multiple other colors of threads. Congratulations. Fundamentally, what we have chosen to do is look beyond each individual issue, knowing that the laundry list of 100 different issues, if we went chasing after every issue, we would be so distracted and burned out, right? There's like, nobody's got time for that. And honestly, some of the manufactured controversies out there are meant to keep us distracted and exhausted. Not saying these aren't real issues and real problems for some people. But if we tackle each of these things at very granular levels, we're going to be wiped out before we tackle a handful of them. So we need to think more broadly. I do not expect you to read the teeny tiny print. But I show you this. Do not try to read the teeny tiny print. We can't even read it when it's...
What teeny tiny print?
Is this on the website?
Yes, it is attached to a document, a theological document on our theory of change. So you'd have to Google it. And if you can't find it, let me know and I'll get it to you. Because we also have a 3-page theological rationale for this. Because there's the 1-page version, and then we are a people of many words. So there's also the deeper theology behind it. I show you this because I mentioned that theory of change, right? We go from left to right. What do we think is wrong with the world? How do we want to approach it? What do we hope the long-term outcomes are? I am sorry. I don't mean to get in your way. What do we hope the long-term outcomes are? So I'm going to go to a slightly less detailed version that doesn't try to get everything on one page. So what are we facing at a deeper level? This is the very left-hand side of the last page. We believe that we are facing an age of disorientation, dislocation, fragmentation, and isolation. We're dominated by voices of exclusion and fear, siloing and supremacy, these senses of unworthiness, right? I'm not worthy, they're not worthy, you don't get to have that. These expectations of self-sufficiency, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. This absence of grace. The big ball of yuck is made up fundamentally of that.
What does siloing stand for?
People being separated, organizations being separated, saying you are all alone.
If you see a farm with a whole bunch of silos that, okay.
Exactly. It's a good Wisconsin metaphor. So just literally, like, you're not supposed to be connected. This is just, you're all alone.
Healthcare, there's the doctor's silo, there's the nurse silo, there's the staff silo, and then the bean counter silo.
Right? Or
I didn't know if that's what was meant.
Yeah. Or, there's this is your dental care. This is your eye care. This is your physician. This is your internal medicine physician. All of those things. This is what we think is behind and underneath all of what we are dealing with. And we have decided to tackle this within all that we do. So if we're addressing climate issues, if we're addressing indigenous issues, if we're addressing voter issues, we are saying, where are people being isolated? Where is there a sense of self-sufficiency being expected and raised? Who's excluding and elevating fear as a primary voice? And how can we elevate the alternative to that? So our choice on how to respond to isolation, exclusion, supremacy, unworthiness, self-sufficiency, and fear is to model the alternative. Church, we know this language. Grace, care, hospitality, connection, joy, creativity, generosity, abundance, what we call holy imagination. We would argue that this is unholy imagination, right? This is the practice of holy imagination over here on the right. We don't think it works to go head on all the time and be the no people. We had multiple meetings as a team to say, how are we going to take on white Christian nationalism? And we're like, no, because that's what they want. They want somebody putting them in the strong position. We're not people of the no. We are people of the gospel, yes. We need to show the alternative to that. So, the example I want to give you is our faith and gun violence work. Like, how do we actually work with this? We started our faith and gun violence work when Parkland happened. This thing on the left is a piece of art made by a kindergarten teacher. This picture on the right is a photo from a vigil after the Uvalde school shooting. Seems like not much is changing, right? After Parkland, and that massacre happened on Ash Wednesday, we put out a call to action to the churches, and we said that we believe it is possible to address the scourge of gun violence as a people of faith, not fear. We believe our faith compels us to act in this moment Standing with the traumatized, aligning ourselves with the hope of transformation and new life. There's that yes work, aligning ourselves with the hope of transformation and new life. We're not here for the fear. We're here for what's next. So, lots of people are like, we need to change the policy around guns. And they're going at the legislature, right? And zero has changed. There are actually studies that 80% of Wisconsin, 80 to 90% of Wisconsinites, which match national statistics, want to see common sense gun legislation. Nothing has changed. There are also national studies that say 66% of people don't believe anything will change even if the legislation changes. So we want to see it changed and we don't think it's going to do anything. Here's what we think. It's more important to work on changing the culture than going straight to policy. You go straight to policy, nothing's changing in this environment. We in the church are people of culture. We are about culture change. We are about changing lives. We are also about organizing people to make differences in their communities. There is a time when we need to show up for policy change, but that's not our first go. We get there eventually. And it's not all of us. Some people are called to that work. So, this is our gun violence work. These are all the things that we're doing around gun violence. So you're like, oh, the Wisconsin Council of Churches is working on gun violence. We held a retreat with youth and used that to help us develop a study action guide on gun violence so churches could talk about difficult issues. How do you have faithful conversations around gun violence? We also regularly hold forums about how we talk about difficult issues. What's your 6-word story on guns? Until we can hear one another's experiences around guns, we can't get away from these politically charged paths. We sponsored a performance of Plays to End Gun Violence written by youth playwrights. Hear the common theme? Youth are prophetic voices in this time. We're connected to the Guns to Gardens movement that literally blacksmiths decommission guns into garden tools and sells the garden tools to fund the purchase of unwanted guns that can be used to blacksmith into garden tools. I know a retired pastor who is doing this in retirement. He's got a portable forge. So I know churches that have sponsored these in their neighborhoods. So talk to me if you want to do this next spring. I'm looking to fund an internship for a college student who wants to be part of this. We're Orange Weekend, first weekend in June. Summits, vigils, we amplify others who are talking about this, and we invite people to pray obnoxiously. We're people of faith, right? Think about the persistent widow. How do you change things that won't change? You're obnoxious in your persistent faith about it. You keep showing up. Now, organizing, we partner with people who are community organizers. We're not community organizers in that way, but we know people who are. We partner with Brady and the Wisconsin Anti-Violence Effort. We gather impact stories and resources through our forums. Now up here, this is going to be hard for you to read, I bet, so I will read it at you. We are in the policy arena a little bit. We connect with other people's advocacy days. We are members of the 80% Coalition, which is where I got my statistics from, and the Wisconsin Gun Safety Coalition, legislators who want to be active on the issue. We put out action alerts when there's a good opportunity to contact your legislator, and make sure we know what the window of opportunity is. When something happens, there's something called plasticity as opposed to rigidity. So plasticity is when something is more likely to be able to change within a certain window after when something happens. And then people's opinions and perspectives and willingness to take action harden up again. Right? If you wait too long, oh no, it's too soon to do anything. You've heard this, right? Then people harden up again. This is our map of how we work on any issue. I'm just showing you one of our many issues. But we see how many things we have down here? We focus here. This is the side stuff. This took 7 years of modeling to get to that, and I just offered it to you for free. This is what I want you to know. You got to start by listening. Like, who are we? What do people think we do as an organization? Right? So, FPC. What do people think we do? What do we think we do? What do we actually do? Do they match? And what do we want to be known for? We had multiple retreats with so many flip charts and dots. So many flip charts and dots. And we had really deep conversations with one another. This one over here on the right, we had a really good conversation about what Jesus and justice and communion meant to us. Somebody said, well, I don't want to go into the future without Jesus. And somebody said, well, to me, Jesus is communion and communion is Jesus. And somebody else said, well, to me, justice is Jesus and Jesus is justice. And so it wasn't just like this, we are going to plan the future. It built our community as leaders. And after these meetings, we got to this question. The problem of the world was holy imagination. There's a shortage of holy imagination in the church and in the world. And if we can't do holy imagination in the church, then how can we offer it as a gift to the world? And we wanted to be known as the organization that was helping the church and the world get it back. That was the beginning of this 7-year arc of planning. That came from this listening. So if I had one piece of advice for you on stepping into the future, is to ask those sort of questions of yourselves in your community. What do people think we do? What do we think we do? What do we actually do? And what do we want to be known for? So that gun violence map that I talked to you about, how might those ideas translate to the local church? Here's the setting vision pieces and culture. What's at the core of who we are, different from any other church? By what or whom are we inspired, right? We said we were inspired by the youth movements on the streets. Are we out on the streets? No, that is not who the Wisconsin Council of Churches is. We cannot mobilize 21 Christian traditions, something like 35 regional offices, presbyteries, and the equivalents. Can you imagine getting 35 presbyteries out on the streets? That's not going to happen. But we were inspired by these youth movements who said something is wrong and we need to be out there and we need to speak the truth. And we took from that the idea of agility. Gosh, that sounds like business speak, right? But we said that holy truth telling. Okay, we are inspired by that. We need to make sure whatever we do, we are able to move quickly. What's the good news we're uniquely given to share? We are the only council of churches in the nation that moves this fast. Nobody else moves this fast. And, we are now known around the nation. We just gave a workshop at a workshop, I know, but the name of the conference is the National Workshop on Christian Unity. So we just gave a workshop on this model. How will we make this community different by being in it? How is FPC a catalyst in this community for what needs to happen? So then you move from the culture, which is the most important, which is why you get stars here, to then educating and connecting and equipping people for action in all the great ways a church does that. Education, Carmen. How will we organize ourselves in all of our systems to maximize the possibilities, right? So Janet used to be on our Unity and Relations Commission. We no longer have a Unity and Relations Commission, not because we thought their work was unimportant, but a commission that met 3 times a year was not going to facilitate that sort of agile work we said we wanted to make happen. So now we have a structure that lets us call together people for certain projects and certain initiatives. Policy then, how do the powers and principalities, you know what I mean when I say that? Yeah. How do the powers and principalities of our time affect this local community? How do the things happening in Madison or DC translate here? Do we know? How will we use our power? Because you have power. How will we use our power as a church, as church people, to impact the way those policies affect us here? You've got a social service program down at the end of the building, right? How do government policies affect them? Are there ways that the faithful people here can support any negative ways the policies affect them, or support the continuation of the positive ways policies affect them? Just an example. So, relatively brief. Like, this is how to translate that map to a local church. Okay. Almost at the end of the presentation, which is where we can get into lots of conversation. So this is the really particular part of, so what is the WCC working on these days? Because I know the vague big ball of yuck isn't going to cut it. Within the big ball of yuck, there are threads on what we call chaplains to the apocalypse. Don't be scared. We're not reading Revelation every day. An apocalypse is an uncovering, right? Something that is now being seen. There are so many things that are being seen and are being overwhelming realities for people now. And we had a colleague who said online, I wasn't trained to be a chaplain to the apocalypse. Okay, so how do we resource good church people to be chaplains to the apocalypse? Because if it feels like this really, really big thing, How do we do that? Clergy and judicatory transitions. There's this thing with a long-term interim presbyter you may have heard about. You're not the only presbytery. And also 40% of clergy have seriously considered retiring or resigning in this time. So many people are leaving ministry. We're doing work around that. Our community health program, which had been focusing on COVID, is now working on mutual aid and emergency preparedness. You know, these super hot days, this isn't going to be the end of them. You know, wildfires and droughts, it's not going to be the only places they have been. We need to help churches be catalysts for community work in responses to this. We work on Indigenous justice and right relationship. Churches that want to do land acknowledgements and land acknowledgements that actually matter, that aren't just words. So sure, you can say, yeah, this land is blah, 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 blah. But unless you get to a step that says, and because of that, we will, then it doesn't mean much. And so we help churches with the because of that, we will part. We're also working with the Brothertown Indian Nation. Wisconsin has 11 federally recognized tribes, and one that lost its federal recognition and has not gained it back. Brothertown has a long and complicated story, but basically they were moved by the US government so many times in tandem with the Stockbridge Munsee and the Oneida. And they were about to be moved again in the 1800s. And they said, if we become US citizens, will you stop moving us? And the US government said, sure. But they didn't really tell them about the other things that meant. So when they lost their federal recognition, they lost a whole bunch of other responsibilities and rights that go along with being a federally recognized tribe. So for instance, when a whole bunch of their tribal records were discovered, they didn't have the ability to take possession of them according to US law. The Menominee tribe had to acquire them on behalf of the Brothertown Nation as a good deed, basically. When remains of ancestors are discovered, they don't have the automatic right to take possession under the laws of the United States that have to do with repatriating the ancestors. There are all sorts of things like that. It is going to take an act of Congress to get their status back. We're working with them to collect signatures right now. They need a Republican co-sponsor for this act of Congress. Senator Baldwin is willing to sponsor, but she says she will not do it without a Republican co-sponsor, because in this government, it will not work unless it's bipartisan. So if you're interested in signing, on the table over there, I have a place for signatures. Racial justice, we're working on the environment and education. You may have noticed that education about the history of racial minorities in the US is somewhat of a flashpoint these days. We're gathering people who want to learn more about that and empowering them to support librarians and teachers. We're addressing white Christian nationalism. We have a big project on digital ministry and internet access. I have stickers. You can take one. We know a whole bunch now about rural Wisconsin and what broadband means, and we're working with United Way on this. Churches in the Wisconsin housing crisis. I can do a whole presentation on this. I'm not going to do it now. But watch, we're going to do a forum in Wausau next spring. We support refugee resettlements and the Poor People's Campaign and the Clergy Emergency League. We have funds that others have given us to be custodian of in order to help disperse them when they're needed. So when the Afghan refugee crisis came along, we were able to serve as a clearinghouse for information and aid. Study action guides. I have information on the table, a brand new one on labor justice, and we revised our immigration one. I understand there's a lot of concern about immigration in the North lately. And we foster ecumenical and interfaith connections. Remember I said 21 Christian traditions? We don't always play nice in the sandbox. We're all a little bit different. We talk a little bit different in worship. We have slightly different theologies. We don't always have rules about how we share pastors. Like if I want to go preach in an ELCA church, I have to go get their bishop's permission. Like how do you make sure that everybody knows who they need to talk to do work together and how it works? We are the official people who help make that happen. It's really cool and amazing work. I am sure I'm leaving things out, but like those are the big pieces. We have 8 people on staff. They're not all full-time. And that's a piece of what we're doing. This is a picture from one of our gun violence youth summits. That's a little summary. That's me. And now questions, comments, conversation. I tried to be as fast as I could so we had time to talk.
One thing, from our outreach committee and other efforts within the church, we've tried to connect with other local congregations on things that were of interest to others and also a little broader than we could do the heavy lifting on. And we found certain congregations will do it, but I'm not 100% sure that I can say, well, it's because they're a denomination or because it's that particular congregation. Do you have any sort of advice for how to troll for what congregations might be into the same stuff you're into?
You can always drop us an email. We are actually, one of the things we're working on is a mapping project. I have a professor at UW Madison in the Planning and Landscape Architecture Department who is going to help us GIS map the churches in Wisconsin. I just have to gather the data, which is always the fun part, right? So we can actually see at a glance who's doing what broad class of ministries. So like if we said, oh, who's interested in green teams? Who's got childcare? Who's whatever? We would be able to visualize that on a map.
Okay, I'll watch for it.
Yeah, but meanwhile, we have a little toggle in our database for anything we know because our staff has visited a church. So you can always email us, wcoc@wichurches.org is the mailbox our admin looks at. And she would be able to check our database for area churches. So if you're like, hey, we want to work on a project about whatever, is there anybody in our area who's working on that? She'd be able to check.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah.
We're getting ready to have crop walk,
Yeah.
and we have trouble getting evangelical churches to participate because they don't like the church road service.
Yep.
And then we have trouble with the Catholic churches because many years ago when Bishop Burke was down in La Crosse,
Yeah.
I had a big squabble with him at that time. And, he has said the Catholic churches can't participate. And I know that a lot of them in other places do,
Mm-hmm.
but it's never changed in this diocese. I'd love to see that switch, because, we had a group of kids from the local Catholic school that went
Right.
through this big mission project.
And they're in the lacrosse diocese here?
Yeah. And then we lost all them. We would get a few individuals to participate, but as a church or as a school, no.
Have you tried connecting through Catholic Charities?
Well, not lately. I think that was a little bit of a problem because they wanted people to donate to that rather than.
Sure. So the lacrosse diocese is an observer, one of those very funny categories that's required because the Catholic Church can't be a member of anything that's not Catholic, is an observer of the council. So, it may be that under the new bishop, we could make some overtures.
Yeah, there's been several different bishops since Burke was there.
Yeah, Burke was special.
Yeah.
It's also going to be interesting to see what happens with the Roman Catholic Church in Wisconsin, because the Archbishop in the Milwaukee diocese is about to retire. I think he's like a year away from his mandatory retirement date. And depending on who they put in there, I mean, he's technically not in charge of his brother bishops, but he has a lot of influence in setting tone. So if they get somebody who's a little more progressive in there, it may change things a bit. The things you learn.
So I have known of the existence, I've heard reference to Wisconsin. Yep.
That.
But I haven't, I've been playing on your website a little bit as you've been talking here. And I'm just trying to get a better understanding. My guess is because it's so many churches that you're looking, the things that you guys work on are the things that the majority of the churches can agree on, and that would probably be why me as a giant LGBTQIA advocate is not saying anything about that on here. Would that be correct?
That would be correct. So, I will tell you how we are handling LGBTQIA issues. And I hate saying issues because it's not issues, it's people, right? I'm ordained in the UCC. I am explicitly, personally open and affirming, as are the great majority of our staff. Historically, we have not taken a position because of that very reason you bring up. We have member denominations who are not. We have member denominations who are tearing themselves apart.
Like the Methodists.
Like the Methodists. I mean, it just makes your heart ache. We have member traditions where you have clergy walking a very careful line to talk about God's love and mercy as predominant values, because that's about all they can do in their theology, right? And this is where it gets fun, because I'm a troublemaker. And I will use anything I can to walk right up and put my toes on the fuzzy line. Our historical priority has been the visible unity of the church. And sometimes people think unity as a primary value means you don't want to do anything that's going to chase anybody away, right? oh no, I can't do that because somebody's gonna leave if we take a stance. And I think it was a 2002 statement, I'd have to double check the date. Our theological statement on nonviolence, I'm not sure when you were on the commission, Janet. But our 2002 theological statement on nonviolence would have been written by members of a commission and approved by a commission, approved by the board of directors and the full membership of the council, right? So this is not just one or two people. This is everybody saying, this is the council's position. Within that statement, we say that it is inappropriate for the church to stand aside if anyone is facing harm or violence because of any one of a number of measures of their identity, which happens to include gender and sexuality on the list. Oh gosh, I can work with that. So while we are not screaming pride, 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 that gives me the basis now that my board has discussed this to go out and participate in Trans Day of Remembrance and to stand in solidarity with people when they are facing attacks. And so, for example, in Watertown, there is just a pride event and a drag story hour. And Nazis show up, literal Nazis. And there is going to be a church-sponsored rally at a gun club with speakers sometime in the next couple of weeks against this, against the Pride event and the drag story hour and all that. And so we are supporting the folks who are planning an alternative event. So is it out front screaming, affirming? No, but we are increasingly stepping up now that I have board. Not only does it let you, but it compels you to act. So we have found a way.
And it seems, I mean, like I took some info from a few pictures because that's just how I process things, but the groundwork is there to be able to use it in other places. So some of the what you do, you know, to be able to extrapolate that and use it in other places.
Right. So, you know, if we would stand with a synagogue that was attacked, a rabbi that was attacked, a black church, a Coptic church, then why would we not stand with an affirming church or a queer pastor or, so it's fully consistent.
I'm wondering, does the Wisconsin Council of Churches take up issues of declining membership in mainstream churches in any way? And what made me ask that question is I'm just thinking about, we specifically have attracted people by putting rainbow stripes outside our church and having a mission statement that's front and center about justice and inclusion. And that's worked for us to hold our own in terms of that. Is that an area in which the council works, helping churches to not go out of business?
We have, we've done that work in several ways. And we actually have a Zoom workshop coming up in a few weeks. Not directly on that end, but I'll get back to it. For churches that need to think about holy closure. So a little bit further down the timeline, but okay, rather than hanging on and thinking, oh my gosh, you know, we will just wait until Aunt Tilly's funeral. Let's do this right and see what legacy we can be a part of, as I talked about in there, the church, and not just think about the church. We are also working with churches in a broader perspective of how do we collaborate? Not every manifestation of the church needs to provide every ministry. And part of why we're burning ourselves out is because everybody thinks they need to be everything to everybody, right? Not every church has to provide a children's ministry. Not every church has to provide an elder ministry. But what if together we figure out what our gifts are and we make that happen? My classic example is there are 4 churches on Church Street and none of them can afford a full-time pastor's salary and health care. Clearly, we need to be working together.
But I think, to kind of piggyback with him, I think it's necessary, and especially for the Wisconsin Council of Churches, not to look at how you can help people dissolve because they're getting too small, but to look at why aren't we relevant anymore to these people? There have been a number of articles, I like to look just at the headlines on the computer, and there have been 3-4 articles in the past week about, one was Jesus is woke, so that's why, Christianity, but we need to look at why we aren't relevant, I think. What makes us not something they want to belong to, because they'll belong to a woman's club or, another club, or do something in the community in an activity. Why isn't the church?
So frankly, the research that we've seen and the experience that we have lived out with people is that people will affiliate for a time, not a lifetime member. People will affiliate for a time with an organization that they feel is doing meaningful work. And that often doesn't mean for the younger generation that Sunday morning worship is where it's at. It's not that we're doing something wrong with Sunday morning worship, we just have to change the music or the format or whatever, which is like people get all, oh, we just have to change it. Not necessarily. It's that the relevance factor is the community ministry, the justice, the community impact. I want to be part of that thing, and I have precious little time with my family, and the Sunday morning quiet time at home, or pancakes and pajama time with my family, that might be the only time we get together. Sunday morning might be the only time that my husband and I have the same day off, right? But that being said, I'll go do something, a project with these people on Thursday night. We'll work on the community garden together. We'll go do whatever. But I don't necessarily have the time to be a franchise player. Does that make sense? That's the research we're seeing and the conversations we're having with people. That seems to be the shape of things. And so that also bears out this idea of consolidation, right? If you don't have as many person hours dedicated to a community as a volunteer, then that argues for communities working together on ministries to make it viable. It doesn't necessarily feel like good news to those of us who are invested in institutions, right? If we are invested in the good ship church, here I am. I have this big vessel that I have to staff and I have to steer. I'm like, I can't turn it adequately to make it all happen. But I can launch lifeboats. Church, we need to launch the lifeboats. We can't wait for the turn to happen. We just need to launch the lifeboats. And we'll have this flotilla of boats. That is still church. It just doesn't look the same as the ginormous boat. I realize I'm saying this in the middle of the state and not like near the Great Lake, but you get me.
Well, and I will say that, when you talk about the institution showing up on Sunday morning, it's sort of like, some people who might want to come a few times and then participate in a few outreach ministries or something like that, then when they do show up on Sunday, you sense that some of them are a little apologetic. I'm sorry, I'm not here all the time, and that sort of turns them away in a way. Not anything we're doing, but it's just in their mind.
Right, the mindset of shame is so strong.
Yeah, I don't know how to, it's something to think about.
Right, and so, how do we get away from that mindset of shame and have that mindset of joy and peace and spaciousness, right? Like it's okay. You don't have to hold on to that sense of chaos that you brought into the room with you. You're here now. The number of times I say to somebody when they show up at a thing, no judgment, no shame. You're here. It's cool. I'm really glad to see you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's a spiritual practice of hospitality. And people are astounded. They don't believe it because they're so unused to it. How can this be true? How can there be enough bread and fish for a whole hillside of people? Right? I don't know. I don't have to rationalize it. It can just be true, and I can be grateful, and there can be leftovers.
And do you have a piece of literature or a study or anything, sort of guidance for congregations in terms of treading the line on advocacy? I mean, over on the one side, there are legal requirements where you can't advocate politically, but you can educate and so on. And then there's the internal questions of, but if I get too front and center on that issue, then we turn away existing members. You have a piece we can read. You don't have to sort of explain it, but.
I don't have a piece with me, but I do have some
Online?
resources that I can get to you.
Okay, I'll email you.
You drop me a note to remind me, that'd be great, because anything you tell a pastor on Sunday morning, it's gone.
Well, it's mutual between us. Whoa.
In general, the line is issue, right? You can always talk about issues and how they impact people, right? You're not talking about legislation. You're not talking about a candidate. You're talking about your neighbors in the community and maybe how they're hurting, right? I told you about this digital equity project. There's a community one of our staff members went to this week. The church has a health program. People don't have broadband in their community. They've got dial-up, right? And they don't have local health clinics, right? So they've got this little community health clinic at the church. And because they don't have enough local doctors, to have their big doctor's appointments. Lots of them are doing telehealth, right? How in the world are you supposed to have a telehealth appointment if you have broadband? If you don't have broadband, if you've got dial-up? They go to the church. They go to the church, and the church gives them a private room, and they use the church's internet, and they have their telehealth appointment at the church. Okay, but you know what? I can talk about my neighbor who can't get their doctor's appointment because there aren't enough doctors and there's not enough broadband in town. My neighbor's hurting. Jesus told me to talk about my hurting neighbor. I can talk about my hurting neighbor. What we do about that might be something we do in coffee hour. We might write postcards to our legislators in coffee hour. But we're not doing that from the pulpit. We got a line.
Thank you.
Make sense?
Yeah.
I think a little mix of a couple things I've heard that just from a different point of view of, I follow on TikTok and social media various pastors from all across the nation. And I'll hear things, I'll see things. I saw something that brought me to tears recently that I messaged a former pastor of ours to be like, how do Presbyterians feel about this? Because this was wild to me to like it just hit me, this different perspective. And I loved it, but I was also like really conflicted. But I think that we have the availability to reach out to see different things, different places. And yet also I know a lot of people that used to come here regularly that don't, that still this is their church. You know, like if you talk to them, they still feel, you know, that the different connectedness. And then also do we advocate, what if that alienates our older, you know, current members? I understand that and I hear that, but what surprised me this summer is I've gotten into conversations with various people that I thought would be the people of like, oh, we can't do that. And that's not their feeling. Like I've been blown away by a lot of people that I think would be, that when someone says, oh, people are opposed to this, but that I don't hear it directly and I assume, oh, maybe it's this person, you know, like, you know, whatever. It reminds me that we need to not assume, but to actually have those conversations, you know, with the people that we're close with the people that we go, oh, you know, like, whenever I hear that in opposition to any queer issues or, you know, oh, what if let's do this in the community, let's welcome that, let's, you know, what if we were to do this? And I understand you never know who the idiot's gonna be, who's gonna cause an issue, you know, like the woman who was shot recently for a flag. Like, you can't live your life, that was something I saw there, was instead of focusing on the left-hand side, the bad that, you know, like, how do you come in on the other side? That if you, I don't think the optimism of the holy imagination, that, you know, like, instead of focusing on all the bad things that could happen, let's look forward and see what the good things could be and see what that brings in. And it might not bring people in on a Sunday morning, but it might bring people to our community and to feel like they're a part of it. And maybe that it might bring them on a Sunday, but that focusing on the Sunday morning isn't necessarily what it has to be for everyone. And the number of people that probably, you know, I wasn't here last week, but I watched the church service online an hour later. You know, like, you don't know how you're reaching, because of digital, you don't know how you're reaching people. And then the number of times that I interact with someone that goes, I have like 8 friends that go to your church. And I'm like, yeah, you do. Like, what does that mean? You know, what do you think that means? You know, and so it's that, I don't know a different way to phrase it, because I don't think you have to be Christian, but they'll know we are Christians by our love. And, you know, like that if we just remember to be loving, to be kind, to be generous, to be open. And then go, hey, and I go to First Presbyterian. You know? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I think there's knowing who you are and what you stand for is really important to claim that identity as this church is doing and saying, no, we understand this isn't going to be for everybody, but this is who we are. And if you can at least live with that, you're welcome here, but we're not going to let your dislike of it make us stop being who we are.
Right.
Right? And the community is much larger than the people who are here at any given point in time, or the one or two people who might be loudly expressing their discomfort. Right? I was at an ecumenical and interfaith event where the keynote speaker was the moderator of the United Church of Canada. And he said, when we think about church unity, so often we elevate this idea of not letting anybody get away. Right? We have to keep everybody at the table. And he said, what if instead our prime value when we gather as church is instead asking one another, since we last came together, what have you done to work towards the healing and wholeness of God's world and God's children? Or if we said to one another, that thing you're doing is not good for the healing and wholeness of God's children, cut it out. You know, if we did that for accountability between churches, instead of just doing, oh, I don't want to cause an issue, right? What would Christ Church be like if we elevated that question? What have you done for the healing and wholeness of God's world, God's children, since we last came together? I can keep talking all day, but I know technically I'm done. There are handouts on the table. There are things to sign if you want to get on our advocacy list, or if you wanted to help the Brothertown Nation. Take some things, please. There are my business cards if you want to find me later. Thank you so much for the time and the invitation to be here.